South Carolina Athletic Director Ray Tanner might be looking for a new baseball coach once again, but he's got one advantage going in his favor this time around.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. I'm Andrew Lyon, the host of this podcast, and also a staff writer for Gamecock Digest over on Fan Nation. Thank y'all so much for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen or watch for your team here today. We are free and available both on YouTube and wherever you get your audio podcasts daily. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now as new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. It has been a little over 24 hours since Mark Kingston was officially let go as South Carolina's baseball coach on Monday morning, which means, of course, that Athletic Director Ray Tanner is currently searching for a new leader to take over the helm for the Gamecocks baseball program. And if we all recall how things unfolded back in 2017 when Chad Holbrook and South Carolina had parted ways after that season and the Gamecocks were looking for a new coach, Florida head coach Kevin O'Sullivan, he was viewed to be the potential front runner to land the job here. And it has pretty much been said since then that, yeah, he was South Carolina's number one guy, but because they went on a deep postseason run that ended in a national championship, plus some promises from Florida's athletic department as far as facilities go, Kevin O'Sullivan wound up staying in Gainesville, and South Carolina again eventually hired Mark Kingston. The thing to note about this coaching search is that is not going to be a massive issue this time around, as there are a plethora of candidates whose names have already been floated out there being attached to this job search that Ray Tanner is going to be able to talk to pretty quickly because of the fact that their seasons are over. And that's not because that these coaches are bad coaches. We're talking about a lot of really good coaches here. So some of the guys that South Carolina has been linked to this point are obviously East Carolina head coach Cliff Godwin, Duke head coach Chris Pollard, along with Wake Forest head coach Tom Walter, and Louisville head coach Dan McDonald. None of those four coaches are currently still in the postseason right now, and so Ray Tanner, for him, this quickens up the entire process. He can weed through these candidates, obviously do his prerequisite background search that he needs to do to get some information, and also have conversations with them and even potentially set up some interviews if he wants to. Now, this might not be the case with every candidate that Ray Tanner has currently on his list. There's probably multiple candidates still out there that are still in the postseason or still in the midst of postseason play right now. One of those guys obviously could be Tennessee associate head coach / recruiting coordinator / hitting coach Josh Elander. And with the Volunteers facing a number 4 seed in Evansville in the Super Regional round this weekend, I think it's fair to say that Tennessee, they're going to be in the postseason for a good while longer. And so if this coaching search drags out for like another week and a half, maybe even 2 weeks, then I think at that point, people are going to know that, hey, it might be dragging out because Ray Tanner's guy, he is still currently coaching for his current team right now. But the reason why this is such a big deal is when we look at these coaching searches, and it's always, the way that fans look at these searches. These coaches, once their names get leaked out there, it's almost like, you look at them as if they've dropped everything else that they're doing, and all they're focused on, much like the athletic director Ray Tanner here, is considering whether or not they want to take this job. And obviously, that's not the case. All these baseball coaches have their own lives at their own schools, at this point right now. They've got family considerations that they have to take into account as well. And so the process never goes as quickly as fans would like for it to. And for the Gamecocks, the fact that a lot of the coaches that they could very well be looking at right now, that Ray Tanner could be looking at, are not coaching at this point, that could lead to a quicker hire, and therefore it could help them out as far as the roster is concerned. Why is that the case? Well, on June the 1st, the transfer portal officially opened throughout all of Division I college baseball, and the transfer portal window is going to be open from then all the way up until July the 2nd. So this isn't necessarily like a 2.5 week window, which would obviously make Ray Tanner have to be a lot more proactive as far as trying to get a coach in place right now. But again, the Gamecocks are currently operating with an interim head coach in Monty Lee. And, for South Carolina, you've got to figure out what your plan is going to be. Whether it is, who knows, Monty Lee actually retaining his current position and being named the permanent head coach, or Ray Tanner, as most I think would expect, going out there and hiring someone from the outside and bringing them into the program. The fact that Ray Tanner can go through this process a lot more quickly means that, again, he could reach an end result, therefore, much faster than he otherwise maybe would have. And then you can have an opportunity to maybe have the new head coach or the new head man talk to all the kids on the roster, figure out which kids he wants to retain, which kids maybe he's intrigued by, wants to give a chance, or which kids he's going to sit there and look at and say, to be honest with you, I just don't see any way you're going to see the field as long as I'm the head coach here. You should probably enter the transfer portal. Not to mention being able to go out into the transfer portal and trying to bring in a slew of kids. Obviously, that helped out South Carolina a great deal 2 off seasons ago as they landed a guy like Will McGillis from Southern Mississippi. And even this past off season with the Gamecocks landing guys like portal player Kennedy Jones from UNC Greensboro, or Dalton Reeves from Presbyterian, Garrett Gainey from Liberty, Ty Good from College of Charleston. South Carolina has done a decent job of landing, again, some impactful transfers over the past couple years at different positions. They're going to definitely have to do that this offseason after letting go of Mark Kingston if they probably want to make it back to the postseason in 2025. And the quicker you make a hire, the more likely you're going to have success. And all you have to do is look at a team like Georgia. Georgia went through this past offseason. Barely finished over 500, decided to fire their head coach, eventually hired LSU pitching coach Wes Johnson. They made a lot of damage, or they created a lot of damage in the transfer portal, and you see where they're at now. Top 8 national seed, about to host a super regional for the first time in gosh knows how long in 2024. So that's not to say that that's going to happen automatically for South Carolina, but your chances of that happening are a lot more likely because of the fact Ray Tanner gets to go through all these candidates a lot more quickly than maybe otherwise you could have. If multiple guys were still in the tournament and they were going to get ready for super regionals, then that would probably hurt Ray Tanner a good deal. So it's great for him that he gets to talk to a lot of these guys without them having to also game plan for an upcoming opponent at the same time. And of course, with this coaching search, there's been a lot of research that I've been doing, and I came across one eye-popping stat or fact on Tuesday morning, one that I'm going to share with all of you in just a couple moments, and also let you know how that stat has changed my coaching hot board. We'll talk about that in a few moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team, both faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. And so, if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free today. Terms and conditions do apply. Welcome back to this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day. And as always, a big thank you to each and every one of you everydayers who make the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen, wherever you get your audio podcasts daily, or your first watch on YouTube. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I was doing some extra research here on this Tuesday morning, trying to find any potential trends that could give us an idea of maybe what South Carolina needs to look for in their new head baseball coach. And obviously, it depends on who you ask when it comes to what exactly should they be looking for. Some people believe that South Carolina should hire somebody that's got prior SEC experience. Other people believe that South Carolina should hire somebody that has experience as a Division I head baseball coach. Some other people might not care about either of those things. So I was trying to find any trends related to those potential prerequisites. And what I found basically was that it's 50-50 on both. You can hire an assistant, it might work out, or you could hire a head coach. It doesn't really matter necessarily if a guy's got SEC experience or not. And I based all this on the 9 SEC head baseball coaches who have made it to the College World Series in the last 4 years. But then I found one particular fact that really changed how I view this entire search process. And that is this. Every single one of the 9 SEC head baseball coaches who have made it to the College World Series at least once in the past 4 years were a part of a College World Series run either as an assistant or as a head coach before they landed at their current stop. Basically, all those coaches knew what it took to get to Omaha, had been a part of a team that had made it to Omaha in the past. So, with that bearing in mind, and then bringing into account the expectation of South Carolina baseball fans, which is, listen, we're not going to expect you to maybe repeat what you did between the years of 2010 and 2012. That was a special run that will probably never get replicated by anybody else. But we do expect you to be competing for national championships. We do expect you to make it to Omaha, let's say, once every 4 years. I think that is more than fair to ask of whoever takes over for this program. So with all that bearing in mind, how did this change, say, my coaching board of the list of candidates that South Carolina should look at? Well, here's the one main change that took place. Tom Walter, I did not mention him on our Monday show. We were talking about South Carolina's baseball coaching search. But having looked at his resume, considering the fact that he's only one of 7 coaches in college baseball history to have taken 3 different teams to the postseason, and he took Wake Forest, a team that doesn't have a lot of history when it comes to baseball, to the College World Series as the number 1 overall seed in 2023. And he's also made to the tournament in each of the last 3 years. When you take all that into account, Tom Walter, in my opinion, is now essentially a Tier 1 candidate. Who joins him in this grouping? Well, I got Cliff Godwin from East Carolina, the head coach up there. Josh Elander, again, the associate head coach over at Tennessee. And Matt Hobbs, the pitching coach over at Arkansas. In my opinion, those are 4 coaches right there. Tier 1 coaches have all been to the College World Series at some point prior to even their current stop or at their current stop. And essentially, they'll know how to get there. They could bring South Carolina back to the promised land in Omaha once again. Those 4 coaches, in my opinion, should be the ones that South Carolina contacts. I took Brian O'Connor off this list. If you, again, listened or watched the Monday show, I included him then. I took him off now because it seems like, realistically speaking, that's probably not going to happen, even though I would love to see him get hired here at South Carolina. So those are the 4 Tier 1 coaches, based on the fact that I threw out there earlier about previous College World Series experience. Now, you will notice, if you've been keeping up, that Chris Pollard was not included on this list. Whereas yesterday, I had Chris Pollard basically in my top group, my top 5 head coaching candidates that South Carolina should call. And here's what I'll say about Chris Pollard. I'm going to be fair in the sense that I'm not going to sit here and say, obviously he stinks as a coach. He clearly does not stink. He's done a lot of great things at Duke. And I'm not going to say he shouldn't be considered. Ray Tanner should keep all options open depending on how this entire process unfolds. But Chris Pollard has never made it to the College World Series. And so because of that, I dock him just slightly and move him down to the tier 2 group that I have with a lot of other guys that, I'm not going to name just for the sake of time. But Chris Pollard, look, he's been to 3 super regionals at Duke. He has forced a winner-take-all game 3 in each of those appearances. So he literally has been just 9 innings away from making it to the College World Series on 3 different occasions, as close to being basically, I guess, a Tom Walter as you can get. So Chris Pollard, in my opinion, should be probably the first guy you call after guys like Cliff Godwin, Josh Elander, Tom Walter, and Matt Hobbs. He's basically number 5 at this point, but again, he's the beginning of tier 2 out of all these candidates. Now, one last thing that I do want to address here, because I know that one name that's also been thrown out there, and I mentioned him earlier, is Dan McDonnell, the current head coach at Louisville. And here's what I will say. I know that Dan McDonnell has actually been to the College World Series a bunch. I think he's been 5 times. And clearly, Louisville was one of the best programs in all college baseball in the previous decade. However, things have fallen off recently. They've only made it to the postseason once in each of the last 4 years. That is problematic. There's been a lot that's been said about Dan McDonnell and the reasons why that might be the case. Some people have floated out there that there's administrative issues, that apparently the commitment to the baseball program, maybe as far as funding or maybe, NIL, it's not good enough for Dan McDonnell to be able to excel. I've also now heard that Dan McDonnell apparently has not necessarily embraced the transfer portal. And because of that, and him basically sticking to some old recruiting methods that now might be viewed a little bit archaically in today's college baseball, that has also played a role in maybe Louisville being held back and not making it to the postseason nearly as much over the past 4 years. So with all that bearing in mind, I get it. Dan McDonnell's got a really good resume, but you cannot just overlook what's happened the last 4 years. And so Dan McDonnell, 5-6 years ago, he probably would have been the top candidate to be the next head coach at South Carolina. Now, I would say that honestly, he should basically be kind of a backup option. And that would have to require promises on his end that he would embrace the new age of college sports. I'm not saying it's all on him. Again, it's a mixture of different factors up there at Louisville, the reason why they've not succeeded lately. But that's just my reasoning for why I don't have Dan McDonnell in that tier 1 group with all of those other guys. Now, South Carolina, here's the thing. They are not going to be the only program looking for a new coach. But right now, obviously, South Carolina, it's probably the best job out there that's available. However, there is another program that is about to join the SEC that could be one to watch. And depending on what happens there, it could change how this entire search process goes for South Carolina. We'll talk about that program and what all could happen in a few moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Again, the NBA Finals are officially set. The Boston Celtics will be taking on the Dallas Mavericks, and obviously opinions have swayed wildly about how this series could unfold. Some people see the Boston Celtics winning this thing handedly. FanDuel has set the odds for Boston winning the series 4-0 at plus 700. Some people might see the Mavericks taking this all the way to maybe, 6-7 games as well, and maybe even sweeping. But obviously that is highly unlikely as the odds are set at plus 2,400. 100. So if you want to look at all those odds on the NBA Finals, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your team every single day in 30 minutes or less. All right, let's talk about the Texas Longhorns here for the next few minutes, because South Carolina, look, we all, I think, agree it is a blue blood job. It is a historic program when it comes to college baseball standards, and there are not very many teams out there that are viewed as being above South Carolina when it comes to college baseball. But one of those teams is the Texas Longhorns. And Texas has an interesting decision to make this offseason regarding their own head coach in David Pierce. And that decision could have a direct impact on South Carolina's head coaching search. So here's the situation. I don't know all of the facts, but what I do know is this. There are rumblings right now in Austin. It's been posted on social media and also been stated by some other people who follow the sport a lot more closely than I do, that David Pierce might not be totally safe in Austin, Texas. Texas made it to the College World Series in back-to-back years in 2021 and 2022. Had a very successful run right after the COVID year took place. However, the Longhorns have regressed in each of the past two seasons. They only made it to the Super Regional round in 2023, and then this season, they did not even host a regional. They still made it to the tournament, but then they did not even make it to the regional final. In the regional that was hosted by Texas A&M, their biggest arch rivals. So, with all that bearing in mind, there are some Texas fans that now believe that the Longhorns have got to make a change, because obviously they're getting ready to enter the SEC, and let's be honest, compared to the Big 12, the SEC, it is dog eat dog. It is way more competitive from top to bottom than anything the Big 12's got to offer. So the Longhorn faithful, I think, realize that, look, if things continue to trend the way they have for that program the last 2 years, then they could face a harsh reality in 2025 when they're playing SEC teams. So why on earth am I talking about all this as it relates to South Carolina's coaching search? Well, here's what I'm going to get at here. As I've mentioned earlier, Josh Elander, he's a Tier 1 candidate, in my opinion, for South Carolina's head coaching position. And I'm not the only one that's thrown his name out there. There are some other people that have stated that he is a guy to watch in this process. Now, Josh Elander talked about timing earlier. He's likely not going to be available for a good while, because Elander, he and the Volunteers, they're currently the number 1 overall seed, still remaining in the NCAA tournament. They're facing Evansville this weekend. Basically a guarantee they're going to make it to the College World Series for the third time in the past 4 years, which is just crazy ridiculous to think of in and of itself. But my whole point here is this. Josh Elander has a strong background with the state of Texas. His alma mater is TCU. Tony Vitello also has a strong background as it relates to the Midwestern United States. He went to school at Missouri, coached there, then coached at Arkansas before eventually landing at Tennessee just about 5, 6, 7 years ago. So here's where I'm going with this. Texas, if they decide to make a massive push for Tony Vitello, they could let go of David Pierce this offseason and turn around and decide we're going to try to get Tony V from Tennessee. If they were to do that, I'm not going to say it's a guarantee Tony Vitello would leave Tennessee for Texas. Obviously, the pressure at Texas would be even higher than it already is at Tennessee. Tennessee right now, I mean, they're in fantasy land with the success that they have enjoyed in this sport of the past few years. And sure, maybe they would be a little bit more spoiled if they had a down year or so, but I think Tennessee still has a decent understanding of where they stand historically in the sport. Texas is not like that with anything, in all honesty, but especially when it comes to football and also baseball. So would he leave to accept all that pressure at Texas? If he gets a decent enough paycheck, who knows? He might decide he wants to go back to maybe where his roots are in the Midwest and take that job. Hypothetically speaking, let's say that happens. Josh Elander is the front runner to basically succeed Tony Vitello at Tennessee, taking him off of the list. So, if Tony Vitello were to indeed maybe get pursued by Texas, if a coaching change is even made in the first place, Elander is basically off of the table, in my opinion, for South Carolina. You even look at Matt Hobbs, the pitching coach at Arkansas. Who knows? If Texas decided, hey, let's go for him because he's done really well under Dave Van Horn the last several years, they could go after him as well. I think that's a lot less likely, though, compared to them maybe going after Tony Vitello. It's Texas. All the money that they got, the boosters, they always want to make a big splash. So I don't think they would go after Matt Hobbs more so than they would go after Tony Vitello. So I'm just saying, for Gamecock fans, right now, you don't have to worry about that because Texas, it's Tuesday afternoon at this point. They've yet to make a decision on whether or not David Pierce will come back for next year. However, if they decide eventually that they're going to let him go, then that changes things for South Carolina, at least as far as one of the candidates, or maybe even, two of the candidates on their board are concerned. So, with all that being said, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast. Hope that y'all thoroughly enjoyed today's show as always. What are y'all's thoughts on the potential advantage that Ray Tanner has this time around regarding the timing of all these postseason exits for South Carolina's top baseball coaching candidates? What are your thoughts on the College World Series background that a lot of these successful head coaches have in the SEC, and how does that affect potentially your own coaching wish list for South Carolina? And lastly, what are your thoughts on how Texas could play a role in this process if they fire their own head coach? Let me know all of your thoughts down below in the comment section if you watch today's show on YouTube, or you can shoot me a direct message on X at @line_SC if you listen to today's show on an audio podcast app. But as always, thank y'all so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, and I'll be sure to catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.